The alarm chimed softly through the corridors of Research Station Kepler 442, its gentle pulse designed not to startle but to alert. Security Officer Ven's antennae twitched as the notification scrolled across his visor. Unauthorized construction detected. Sector 7C. Nursery proximity. Ven's four legs carried him swiftly through the sterile white hallways, his chitinous armor clicking against the metal floor. In his 3 cycles working station security, he'd dealt with malfunctioning equipment, lost cargo, and even a small fire in the cafeteria. But unauthorized construction near the nursery? That was new. As he approached Sector 7C, he could hear them, the soft chirping and chittering of the Velkari cubs. The station housed 23 of the young aliens, their parents serving as part of the joint research initiative between the Velkari Collective and the Terran Alliance. The cubs were supposed to be in supervised play areas, not whatever this was. Ven rounded the corner and stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the observation lounge, at least a dozen Velkari cubs were engaged in what could only be described as frantic construction. Their small furry bodies moved with surprising coordination, their 6 limbs working in tandem as they dragged blankets, cushions, maintenance foam panels, and even stolen cafeteria napkins. They'd created a massive dome-like structure in the center of the room, nearly 2 meters tall, with walls constructed from layered materials held together with what appeared to be medical tape. But it was what lay at the center of the structure that made Ven's breath catch. Talia. The human xenobiologist was curled on her side, fast asleep on the floor, her chest rising and falling in the steady rhythm of deep slumber. She still wore her lab coat, now wrinkled and slightly askew, and her dark hair had fallen across her face. One arm was tucked under her head as a makeshift pillow, and around her the cubs had built their nest. Ven activated his comm. "Commander, you need to see this." 10 minutes later, Commander Jalis arrived with Dr. Morvan, the station's chief xenobiologist. The Velkari scientist's fur rippled with concern as she took in the scene. More cubs had joined the construction effort, and the nest had grown larger, with tunnel-like entrances and what appeared to be a ventilation system crafted from air duct covers. "Extraordinary," Dr. Morvan whispered, her scientific curiosity overriding her alarm. "They've created a communal nesting structure. We've only observed this behavior in wild populations during extreme cold or threat situations." "But why?" Ven asked, his weapon still drawn despite the obvious lack of danger. "And why around the human?" At the entrance to the nest, a cub emerged. He was slightly larger than the others, with distinctive silver markings along his spine. Ven recognized him from the personnel files. Kor, the son of Chief Engineer Velix. Kor's large, luminous eyes fixed on the security officer, and his small chest puffed out protectively. He positioned himself between Ven and the nest entrance, emitting a low, warbling sound that was clearly meant to be threatening, though it came out rather adorable. "Stand down, little one," Ven said, lowering his weapon. "We're not here to harm anyone." Dr. Morvan stepped forward, crouching to Kor's level. She spoke in the clicking, melodic language of the Velkari. Kor responded, his small hands gesturing animatedly toward the nest, then to himself and the other cubs, and finally making a cradling motion. The doctor's fur stood on end. He says they're protecting her, that she's been dim lately. Sad. They've noticed she doesn't sleep in her quarters anymore, that she falls asleep in the labs or common areas. So they decided to build her a proper nest. Commander Zelis's scaled brow furrowed. "The human has been struggling? Why wasn't this reported?" "Humans are complicated," Dr. Morvan said softly. "Their emotional states don't always manifest in obvious ways. But cubs are perceptive. They notice things we adults often miss." Inside the nest, Talia stirred. A tiny cub, no more than a few months old, had curled up against her side, its warm fur pressed against her arm. Another had draped a blanket over her legs. Several more sat in a circle around her, their eyes half closed, keeping watch. Kor chirped again, more insistently this time. Dr. Morvan translated. "He says humans are fragile. They don't have fur to keep warm. They don't have pack instincts like proper people. Someone needs to teach them how to rest properly, or they'll work themselves to death." So the cubs decided to help. Ben felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. In all his time studying other species, he'd learned that humans were unusual. They formed bonds across species lines with remarkable ease. They were stubborn to the point of self-destruction, and they carried their burdens alone far too often. But he'd never considered that other species might learn to care for them in return. "What do we do?" he asked. Commander Jealous was quiet for a long moment, then she tapped her comm. "All station personnel be advised. Sector 7C is temporarily off limits. The nursery has expanded its operations. Do not disturb unless there's an emergency." Dr. Morvan smiled, her whiskers twitching with approval. "I'll inform the parent group. And perhaps we should check on Talia's workload. If the cubs noticed something was wrong, we should have as well." As they left, Ven glanced back one last time. Cor had returned to the nest, carefully adjusting a cushion near Talia's head. The human mumbled something in her sleep, a small smile crossing her face as she instinctively pulled the nearest cub closer. The cub chirped happily, and the others echoed the sound, a chorus of contentment. Ven shook his head in wonder. Humans had conquered the stars through brilliance and determination, had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious time and again. They were fierce, resilient, and endlessly adaptable. But sometimes, they just needed someone to remind them to rest. And perhaps that was the real measure of humanity's success. Not that they were strong, but that they'd taught others to care for them when they weren't. The nest stood throughout the night, and when Talia finally woke, she found herself surrounded by sleeping cubs, warm and safe, and for the first time in weeks, truly rested. Cor opened one eye as she stirred, chirped softly, and went back to sleep. She smiled, tears pricking her eyes, and carefully settled back down among her unlikely guardians. Some things, she realized, transcended species. Care, compassion, the simple act of noticing when someone needed help. And maybe, just maybe, humans weren't the only ones worth celebrating in this vast universe.